So let's start our Dharma talk.
Born directly out of this feeling of wanting to go back to normal, and it had a lot to do with some of the protests that had gone on in different parts of the country, demanding that we reopen our economy and our society sooner than is advisable. We even had almost 1,000 people here in Salt Lake City that were out protesting. And I know all of us would really like to be able to come back to some sense of normalcy. So today's Dharma talk was kind of born out of that, born out of those moments where it would just be nice not to look at other people as a disease vector. Having to walk to the other side of the street when you're walking somewhere, judging somebody because they're not wearing a mask. Somebody gets closer now, closer than 6 feet, our personal distance, our bubble has expanded significantly over what it was just a couple of months ago. And I know there's a part of me that wants everything just to go back. I want it to go back to the way it was. I want to go back to quote unquote normal. I want to be able to get in my car, drive to work, do my job, and not have to think about all the things that I have to think about, especially being a person who is a high risk category. So I think it even more. I find myself almost getting obsessive about germs at times, and it's getting a little silly. So for today's Dharma talk, I want to share some thoughts about this idea of returning back to normal. And I think we see a lot of it. We feel a lot of it in ourselves too. And I just want to go back. I have this yearning to go back to the world that it was before the pandemic turned my world and all of our worlds upside down and topsy-turvy. And I feel that yearning, and if we take a few minutes, we can all feel this yearning that we have. And it's not just a yearning we have in our minds, but it's also a yearning we have in our bodies. It takes up space in our bodies, this yearning for some kind of normalcy to return. And along with that yearning comes a wariness of mind and a wariness of body. And where does this wariness come from? For me, it comes from the anxiety that I walk with every day, the anxiety of tomorrow, the anxiety of my job. I'm a lucky one that I currently have a job, but how long will that last? And if I don't have a job, how am I going to take care of my boys, my wife, my family? And I also worry about getting the virus, being of a higher risk group. Will I just get it, or will I die if I catch it? Will my last scene with my family be waving them goodbye as I go into the ICU? Now, all of these things are unreal and are not in the present moment, but I still carry them with me. And this creates a wariness of mind and body. And I want to go back to that quote unquote normal, because there was a carefully crafted container that I was able to wrap around myself to give myself this illusion of safety and control. And it no longer works. In my very first Dharma talk after the lockdown order, I talked about how our old coping behaviors all of a sudden aren't working like they used to. We used to complain loudly about our 9-to-5 jobs, about the dreariness of going to work, or how days took weeks and weeks took days. And we would complain about our bosses. We would complain about this, about traffic. Oh, good God, how I would like to be able to complain about those simple things again. I would love to be at the office right now. And I thought I would never, ever say that. When our world, our routine, our habitual ways of being are disrupted, then much of our internal world is disrupted. The autopilot ways of being no longer function, and we are jolted out of our seat. We begin to appreciate the small thing that we took for granted and didn't even notice while we were on autopilot. Like how many important small daily human interactions can be. The smile from somebody at a grocery store, um, those friends that we would visit at work on our break, being able to be close to the neighbor and talk, being able to hug one another. All of those things that we took for granted, how much more now do we appreciate that? How much more will that first hug be appreciated? There are so many small things that I appreciate now that I took for granted. And in some ways, that is a part of my desire to return to normal. I appreciate certain things more. I want to experience them with a new awakeness to how much I value them. But there is the other side of normal that I can't go back to. And it's my desire to wake up out of the dream of what normal is. The dictionary definition of normal is defined as the usual, average, typical state or condition. So here is the challenge and the problem with normal. It's an illusion, a misperception of how reality really functions. In reality, there is not really such a thing as normal, not at least in the conventional sense of how we're using that word. And this is something I have learned on my path, is that Buddhas can be very annoying because they won't let you sleep in ever. They're always saying, wake up. Wake up is the call of Buddha. The challenge with normal is that that too often becomes a lullaby which to sleepwalk life through. We become somnambulists, sleepwalkers. One of the things we learn from the Dharma is that there is no typical state or condition, but that everything is constantly moving and changing. Everything at its heart is impermanent. We learn this from the foundational teachings of all Buddhisms, and that is the three marks of existence, the three markings of being alive. They are anicca, or impermanence, dukkha, or suffering and or disappointment, and anatta, non-self. The first mark of being alive, of being human, is the impermanence of all things. And to illustrate this, I love this story that comes from the San Francisco Zen Center. It was back in the late 60s. And David Chadwick shares an experience he had with Shunryu Suzuki when they were talking about impermanence of Buddhism and what does it all mean. And here's the story, quote, Suzuki Roshi, I've been listening to your lectures for years. I said, and I really love them, and they're very inspiring. And I know that what you're talking about is actually very clear and simple. But I must admit, I just don't understand. I love it, but I feel like I could listen to you for 1,000 years and still not get the Buddha's teachings. But I feel I could listen to you for 1,000 more years and still not get it. Could you just please put in a nutshell? Can you reduce Buddhism to one phrase? And of course, everyone laughed. He laughed. What a ludicrous question. I don't think of any of us expected him to answer. He was not a man you could pin down, and he didn't like to give his students something definite to cling to. He had often said to me to have some idea of what Buddhism is. But what Suzuki did answer, he looked at me and he said directly, Buddhism in a nutshell, everything changes. End quote. Now, I love this story, and I love it that it's simple. And when we look at the first mark at the seal of existence, there's impermanence. Literally, everything is constantly changing. And I like the way Guillaume Cabose Sensei puts it, everything is constantly becoming. Us, everything around us, every moment, every day, every breath is continually becoming. Now, change is hard. In our everyday life, change is hard. And that's why there's hundreds and hundreds of books on managing change. The ego self constantly seeks this constancy, the illusion of a fixed world that it can decipher and control. It seeks a magical formula. If I do X, then I will get Y. But in a constantly changing world, such formulas cannot work for very long because by nature, the variables are constantly changing. In some ways, we can look at our need to return to normalcy as an insight to our relationship with impermanence. What is your relationship to impermanence? That is a good question to use for reflection in your daily practice. For the most part, our relationship with impermanence is a complicated one at best. And as the Buddha discovered, one fraught with insecurity, fear, delusion, and suffering. We tend to compartmentalize impermanence. We acknowledge that things change. We see it all around us in nature, in the fact that people die. But when you look at it, we don't act as if though we really believe in permanence, because death is something that happens to everyone else, but not us. For us, impermanence, for the most part, is a conception, not a reality, not a part of the fabric of how we live. The Buddha way is about cultivating a deep awareness of impermanence in our daily lives. And I really appreciate these lines from Thich Nhat Hanh, where he says, quote, if we see impermanence as merely a philosophy, it is not the Buddha's teachings. Every time we look or listen, the object of our perception can reveal to us the nature of impermanency. We have to nourish our insight into impermanence all day long. When we look deeply into impermanence, we see that things change because causes and conditions change. When we look deeply into non-self, we see that the existence of every single thing is possible only because the existence of everything else. We see everything else is the cause and the condition for its existence. We see that everything else is in it. End quote. I love the fact that as we change our relationship and embrace impermanence, it opens us up to a deeper sense of reality, and that is the reality of our interconnectedness to all things. We can kind of see that now as our normal way of business, of doing things, has been disrupted, and we have come to see in new ways the reality of our interdependence. The world is now sharing a new reality, the reality of a virus that has spread from country to country, person to person, to most of the places on the globe. We are literally all connected on a biological level. I now know more than ever that I now know more than ever more about microparticle spread from breath than I ever wanted to know, and how much breath I share with another person literally. We are breathing in each other's DNA continually, constantly. And that's beautiful in a certain sense, and right now is quite terrifying for me. I think what happens is that during this time, we are able to start to see interdependence and impermanence, not just conceptually, but viscerally, in an embodied sense. We also have learned to see how dependent we are on one another for food, for medicine, for support. Could you imagine what we would do if there weren't people willing to be in grocery stores? Or if truckers weren't willing to drive to bring food to us? Or what about the hospitals? The whole idea about flattening the curve is that the doctors who are on the front line, our heroes, would be overwhelmed, and they couldn't, and the whole system would collapse. We are dependent. No matter how independent we like to think we are dependent on one another. And I think that is a great blessing, a great teaching that has come from the pandemic. We can begin to see how a lot of our perceptions before, how our lives were built on this idea that's really a house of cards, that we can do it on our own. Again, Buddhists can be annoying because they've never let us sleep in. They're constantly saying, wake up. Things change because for everything there is a cause and a condition. When this happens, when this arises, when this ceases, and that will cease. Because of this is that. Because of that is this. But for most of our relationship with impermanence continues to be a fraught one. We operate under the misperception of separation, that somehow we are outside of conditionality. The sad stories of those who are saying the virus is a hoax, who ended up dying and succumbing to that same thing that they didn't believe in. How are we denying some other kind of conditionality in our own life that is keeping us from really seeing how things are? But in our misperception, we think we are solid. We want things to be static, to be the same, to be controllable, to be consistent, to be stable, to be normal. We think that we will finally be happy, that this anxiety we carry with us, this exhaustion, this fear that we carry will somehow be put at ease when everything goes back to normal. We fight against impermanence. We fight against change. We argue with reality, not just the impermanence of life itself, but of everything. And the pandemic is also giving us an insight of what a future may look like if we actually return back to business as usual. It's interesting that we think that we can keep change away as if we could put our hand out and stop the course of a river with our bare hands. How foolish we are in this attempt. Impermanence and interdependence are at the heart of being alive. It's what it means to be alive. If we observe how we've lived, we live thinking that the I is the most important thing. As Guillaume Cabose Sensei writes, quote, we live thinking that I is the most important thing. I believe this. I did that. I have a right to. Maybe that's some of what we're seeing in the protests. Now, don't get me wrong. I get it. On a certain level, I get those protesting to open things up. It's a scary world. I don't want this to be the new normal. But any denying of it doesn't change the fact that we have all been changed by it. And there is no going back. And here's the rub that interdependence teaches us, and that this new awareness that we're gaining of interdependence is teaching us. Guillaume Cabose Sensei goes on to say, I am the sum total of all other people and things. I am interdependent. Ultimately, it's not about me as a single entity, because in reality, I am all other people and all other things. I'm starting to understand this more and more. I think what the Buddhas are trying to say when they say wake up is that very thing. We can't go back. We can't even stay where we are because everything is constantly changing. Everything is continually becoming. And though we may be being more reasoned when it comes to opening up our economy, again, in other ways, we still argue with reality and do it with a myriad of things to control events, situations, other people, and the natural arising of our feelings. As if we could fix our lives in place, as if our lives were nothing more than an insect in a display case. Something fixed, attached, glued in place is dead. The same is true about who we are, or who we think we are, or have been told who we are. We too are constantly changing. And here is something that we all share. No matter how much we want things to go back to normal, we will never be the same. And we will never go back to normal, because who we were before, how we saw the world before our pandemic, is gone. The vast majority of us will not test positive for the virus for many years, if ever. But all of us, regardless, the virus will be a part of us for the rest of our lives. It has already changed us, and how we see ourselves, and we see the world, and we see each other, and the things we value and appreciate. It will continue on with us. As I look back at my life, I'm amazed at how many different people I have been. I remember my 20s and 30s, and I remember them clearly, but I am not that person. There's a sense of continuity. I have those memories, but that's not me. That's not me now, in the flow of now, and who I am now. And who am I now will not be who I am when I'm 60 or 80 if I'm so lucky. Who I was before the pandemic is not me now either. I encourage you to think about that, to reflect on that. Why is it so hard to change or to believe that change is possible? The Buddha learned that change is not only possible, but the underlying reality of all existence. As Gyome Kabose taught, Buddha understands that the world in which we live as continuous change. Everything changes. Nothing is permanent. End quote. Impermanence makes everything possible, makes our continual becoming possible, allows the law of karma to operate. At the same time, our attempts to fight against impermanence are trying to find stability, security, normalcy by fixing our lives in place, by attaching to things that by nature are always becoming, always changing. This is the source of so much of our suffering. And I love this from Norman Feischer regarding Dogen's teachings about impermanence. Quote, for Dogen, impermanence isn't a problem to overcome with diligent effort on the path. Impermanence is the path. Practice isn't the way to cope with or overcome impermanence. It is the way to fully appreciate it and live in it. End quote. So the time we're living now, we've been given a great opportunity. This is our winter spring retreat, so to speak, of 2020. It is our COVID retreat to fully appreciate and to realize the teachings of impermanence and interdependence. I want to close the Dharma talk with a quote from Shunryu Suzuki again. Quote, when we realize that the everlasting truth of everything changes and find our composure in it, we find ourselves in nirvana. End quote. May it be so, and Namo Amida Butsu. While you're thinking, I'll share some of my own realizations over the past week. One of my realizations was how eye focused I can be. The whole idea of wearing masks really confused me because, for the most part, wearing a cloth mask is not going to do me any good because more than likely the virus particles can still get in and I can still become infected, although they may slightly minimize my viral load if I were to come across it. And of course, I knew that we would wear it for other reasons, but it never dawned on me that to wear a mask is an act of compassion. To wear a mask, I'm saying that I don't know if I'm affected. I don't think I'm infected, but you know what? I am going to look out for you because you are me and I am you, and I am going to wear a mask. So wearing a mask, especially if you're unaffected, you don't think you've been affected, but wearing a mask represents a compassionate action. And when I had that realization, the first thing I did is I went and bought some masks. I don't have any masks. I bought some bandanas, so I have some ones for an emergency. And not to protect me, but as an act of compassion for everyone else whenever I'm in public. So that was an interesting realization. That one of the things that I would encourage everyone to do if you're not doing it, the other day I was feeling really anxious, and I decided to go for a long walk, and my anxiety said, well, don't do that. That's just going to make me more anxious. And I said to my anxious self, well, that's what you do. You're anxious. You're always anxious. So come with me. Let's go for a walk together. You're going to be anxious anyway, so let's do it together. And we did, and it was a great walk. It was a great moment, and there were opportunities during the walk to engage with compassionate acceptance and to observe judgment and to see how the great Earth Bodhisattva, she may love us and give us great gifts, but she's going to be fine without us. The rest of the planet is probably very grateful for the breather. So the Earth is not made for us. We belong to the Earth. And hopefully this will help many start to realize the reality of that the Earth was not made for us. We are of the Earth. We belong to her. Oh, I shared this, one last thing. I shared this with the meditation group. When I went on my walk the other day, I hugged a tree. I highly recommend it. At first, I felt really awkward doing it. And then I'm hugging the tree, and I start to cry, which really made me feel even odder. But there was something about its stability, its groundedness, its aliveness, its solidity at the same time of its flexibility that really impacted me. And I highly recommend that you go out and hug a tree. Hey, everybody, let's do something here. I'm going to push this back. I'm going to ask all of you to get a little uncomfortable. So let us change your view on your computer to the gallery view to see all your fellow community members. See the people of the fellowship and the Sangha. All of us are in our own homes, but we're also together in each other's hearts and in this collective space. So in our tradition, we put our hands together. Putting our hands together, the idea is teaching and practice. And they come together. And when we bow, we're acknowledging the Buddha in all things. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It was great to have you here.
Thank you, everyone, for watching the Dharma Talk. We are grateful for your practice and grateful that you have joined us. And if you want to support the fellowship, we would be very grateful. You can go to our webpage, which is saltlakebuddhist.org, and there you will find a tab on how to donate online. And we look forward to your support. We also look forward to seeing you once the stay-in-place order is done and to have you come join us at our Salt Lake City physical location at Vitalize Studio in Mill Creek. We look forward to that day, and we enjoy spending time with you. And again, thank you for your practice, and thank you for joining us. Again, you can reach us at saltlakebuddhist.org, or you can reach out to me directly at sensei@saltlakebuddhist.org. Thank you and have a Buddhaful day.